The January sun hung weakly in the Colorado sky, offering light but little warmth to the snow-blanketed streets of Promise Valley. Ice crystals danced in the frigid air, catching the morning light like suspended diamonds over Main Street. At the far edge of town, where civilization surrendered to wilderness, the frozen river curved like a silver ribbon, its surface gleaming treacherously beneath a thin dusting of fresh powder. Tommy Wheeler stepped onto the ice with boyish confidence, ignoring his mother's warnings about the river's dangers. At 12 years old, he considered himself practically a man, especially since his father's passing had left him the man of the house. The ice groaned beneath his boots as he ventured further from shore, following deer tracks that crossed the frozen expanse. Bet they know all the safe spots, he muttered to himself, clutching a worn notebook where he recorded observations about animal behavior. Tommy dreamed of becoming an engineer one day, building bridges and railways that would connect Promise Valley to the wider world. He didn't notice the darkening patch of ice until his next step sent a spiderweb of cracks shooting outward. The sound, like gunshots in the winter silence, froze him in place. His heart hammered against his ribs as the ice beneath him began to sag. From her vantage point at Widow Coleman's house on the hill overlooking the river, Abigail Abby Lawson spotted the boy's peril before anyone else. She'd been delivering freshly darned stockings to the elderly former teacher when movement on the river caught her eye. "Martha," she called over her shoulder, already pulling on her coat. "It's the Wheeler boy. He's on the ice." The elderly woman appeared in the doorway, spectacles perched on her nose. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, watching as Abby flew down the hill toward the riverbank. Abby ran with single-minded determination, her threadbare coat flapping behind her. Her long auburn hair, hastily secured at the nape of her neck, came loose in the wind. 22 years of hardship had taught her that hesitation could be fatal, whether facing a man's unwanted advances or a winter storm without shelter. She heard the ice give way before she saw it, a sickening crack followed by a child's terrified scream. Tommy had plunged through the surface up to his chest, his small hands clawing desperately at the jagged edges as the current pulled at his legs. Without pausing to consider her actions, Abby slid onto her stomach at the river's edge, distributing her weight as she inched toward the struggling boy. The cold bit through her clothing instantly, but she focused only on the distance remaining. "Hold still, Tommy," she called, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "The more you fight, the faster the ice will break." The boy's face was pale with terror, his lips already taking on a bluish tint. "I can't. It's pulling me." "Look at me, not the water," Abby commanded, continuing her careful approach. "I'm coming to you." By now, people had begun to gather on the shore. Abby recognized Mrs. Wheeler's distinctive wail rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "That Lawson girl, what's she doing?" someone asked. "She'll fall in herself," another replied. "Somebody get a rope," called a more practical voice. But Abby blocked out the voices, focusing entirely on Tommy's terrified eyes. She had almost reached him now, close enough to see the ice continuing to fracture beneath his failing grip. "Give me your hand, Tommy," she said, extending her arm. "Quick now." The boy reached for her and their fingers touched briefly before he slipped further into the frigid water. His scream pierced the winter air. Without hesitation, Abby lunged forward, grasping his coat collar just before he disappeared completely. The sudden movement cracked the ice beneath her, plunging her into the numbing cold up to her waist. Gasping at the shock, she nevertheless maintained her grip on the boy, using her free arm to anchor herself to the more solid ice behind her. With strength born of desperation, she heaved Tommy upward, pushing him onto the ice surface. "Crawl," she ordered through chattering teeth. "Spread your weight. Crawl toward shore." The boy obeyed, his sodden clothes already stiffening in the freezing air. Abby struggled to pull herself from the water, her limbs growing heavier with each passing second as the cold sapped her strength. Finally reaching solid ground, she collapsed beside Tommy, both of them shivering violently. The crowd surrounded them immediately, someone draping a horse blanket over the boy while keeping a careful distance from Abby. Gertrude Wheeler pushed through the onlookers, falling to her knees beside her son. Relief contorted her features for only a moment before hardening into familiar disdain as her gaze fell on Abby. "Don't touch my son. You—" She bit off the word, glancing at the crowd. "You've done enough. Stay away from him." Abby struggled to her feet, water streaming from her clothes. The bitter wind cut through her wet garments, but Mrs. Wheeler's words stung more sharply. He was drowning, Abby said simply, wrapping her arms around herself as ice crystals began forming in her hair. And what were you doing watching my son in the first place? Mrs. Wheeler demanded, pulling Tommy protectively against her. Always lurking about, aren't you? Martha Coleman had made her way down the hill, leaning heavily on her walking stick. For heaven's sake, Gertrude, the girl just saved Tommy's life. But Mrs. Wheeler was already leading her son away, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. A few people cast uncertain glances toward Abby, but no one offered her assistance. Come on, child, Martha said gently, placing a bony hand on Abby's shoulder. Let's get you warm before you catch your death. The two women made their slow way back up the hill, leaving wet footprints in the snow that began to freeze almost immediately behind them. An hour later, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loosely on her frame, Abby sat before Martha Coleman's fireplace, a steaming cup of tea warming her still trembling hands. Her own clothes hung by the hearth, steam rising from them as they dried. You shouldn't have risked yourself like that, Martha scolded, though her eyes shone with pride. That river's claimed stronger folk than you. Abby stared into the flames. I couldn't just watch him drown. No, I suppose you couldn't. Martha settled into her rocking chair with a sigh. You've always had more courage than sense, Abigail Lawson. A faint smile touched Abby's lips. Not much use for sense in this town. Hasn't done me any favors. Sense is never wasted, Martha countered, reaching for her knitting. Though I grant you, Promise Valley's not keen on recognizing it in women, especially saloon girls, Abby finished quietly. The older woman's fingers stilled on the needles. You're more than that label, Abby. Always have been. Abby didn't respond. After 3 years of serving whiskey to miners and traveling salesmen at the Frontier Saloon, she knew exactly how the town saw her. Never mind that she served drinks and nothing more, or that she'd taught herself to read and calculate figures better than most men in Promise Valley. Once a woman worked at the saloon, her worth was decided. I should get back, she said finally, rising to check her clothes. Mr. McGrath doesn't approve of tardiness. Martha's expression darkened. That man works you too hard for too little pay. It's work, Abby replied simply. In Promise Valley, 1883, that was enough. She changed back into her own clothes, still slightly damp but wearable. As she prepared to leave, Martha pressed a small book into her hands. New arrival, Monsieur, the older woman said with a conspiratorial smile. Engineering principles. Thought you might find it interesting. Abby's eyes lit up momentarily before caution reasserted itself. I'll have to be careful. After last time, Martha nodded grimly. 2 months earlier, Judge Clayton had caught Abby reading a scientific journal behind the saloon. His subsequent lecture about women's delicate constitutions being damaged by excessive learning had been delivered loudly enough for half the town to hear. Knowledge is never wasted, Martha repeated, her faded blue eyes fierce behind her spectacles. No matter what they say. With the book safely hidden inside her coat, Abby made her way back toward town. The sun was beginning its early winter descent, casting long shadows across the snow. She took a moment to count the coins in her pocket, 6 in total, everything she owned in the world after paying for her meager lodgings above the saloon. Not for the first time, she considered leaving Promise Valley behind. $27 hidden in a tin beneath her bed, saved penny by penny over 3 years. Not enough for a train ticket to San Francisco and the teaching positions rumored to be available there. Not yet, but someday. The thought sustained her as she approached Main Street, where whispers and stares followed her progress. News of the river rescue had spread, but Gertrude Wheeler's interpretation clearly dominated the narrative. Watching the boy, peculiar interest. No proper woman would expose herself that way. Always knew there was something wrong with that one. Abby kept her eyes forward, her expression carefully neutral. She'd learned long ago that displaying hurt only invited more cruelty. The street was unusually busy for a January afternoon, with several horses tied outside the general store and a small crowd gathered near the bank. It was then that she noticed him, a stranger standing beside an exhausted chestnut mare outside Simmons' diner. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath a quality beaver hat, he swayed slightly on his feet, one hand braced against the hitching post for support. Even from a distance, Abby could see the signs of a difficult journey. The ice encrusting his coat, the mare's heaving sides, the way the man's shoulders slumped with fatigue. Without conscious thought, her steps turned toward him. The stranger's face was partially obscured by a frost-coated beard, but his eyes, a startling clear blue, locked onto hers as she approached. Something in that gaze, a depth of intelligence and weariness, caught her attention. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, stopping a respectful distance away. He straightened somewhat, pride visibly warring with exhaustion. "Just need a moment to catch my breath, miss. My horse and I have come a long way." His accent marked him as Eastern, his clothing quality despite the travel-worn appearance. Not a drifter or common laborer then. Abby glanced at the diner's window, where old man Simmons watched with undisguised suspicion. She knew that look well. He'd refuse service to the stranger if he suspected the man couldn't pay. Decision made, Abby reached into her pocket and withdrew her 6 coins. Everything she had in the world, but in that moment, it seemed the only possible choice. She approached the diner door and knocked firmly. Simmons cracked it open, flour dusting his apron and receding hairline. "Put his breakfast on my tab," Abby said, nodding toward the stranger. Simmons' laugh was short and sharp. "You got no tab, girl. Cash only. Always been cash only for your kind." The familiar humiliation burned, but Abby kept her expression impassive as she placed the 6 coins on the threshold. "This should cover it. He needs a hot meal." Simmons stared at the coins, then at her, before scooping them up without a word. The door closed firmly in her face. When she turned, the stranger was watching her with an unreadable expression. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "You looked like you needed it more than I did," Abby replied simply. Before he could respond further, she turned and walked away, heading toward the Frontier Saloon, where the evening customers would soon arrive. Behind her, Gabriel Harrington watched her go, an unfamiliar emotion tightening his chest. He had seen her clothes, threadbare and patched, clearly secondhand, and recognized the sacrifice those few coins had represented. Yet she had given them freely, to a complete stranger. In his 3 decades of life, mostly spent among Boston's elite, where charity was a social obligation rather than a spontaneous act of kindness, he had never witnessed anything quite like it. Inside the diner, he ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple meal as his mind returned to the young woman with the striking auburn hair and composed dignity. There was something about her, something beyond the unexpected kindness, that nagged at his consciousness. "New in town?" Simmons asked gruffly as he refilled Gabriel's coffee cup. Gabriel nodded. "Just arrived. Name's Gabriel Harrington." "Business or pleasure?" The question was casual, but Gabriel noted the keen interest in the man's eyes. "Business, railroad business." Simmons' expression shifted immediately, a calculating look replacing the previous indifference. "Railroad, you say? Union Pacific?" "That's right," Gabriel confirmed, maintaining the cover story he'd carefully constructed. "Surveying potential routes through the valley." "Well, now that's mighty interesting," Simmons replied, his tone suddenly warmer. "Judge Clayton was just saying the other day how this town's due for progress. You should pay him a visit. He's the most important man in Promise Valley." Gabriel filed the name away. "I'll do that. And the young woman who paid for my meal, who might she be?" Simmons's face darkened. "That's Abigail Lawson, works at the Frontier Saloon." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word of advice, Mr. Harrington. Men of your standing should keep clear of her type. Nothing but trouble there." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I see. Thank you for the advice." He left a generous tip that made Simmons' eyes widen, then stepped back into the biting cold. His mare looked somewhat recovered after the brief rest, though her sides still heaved from the exertion of their journey. "Just a bit further, girl," he murmured, patting her neck as he swung into the saddle. "Let's find ourselves lodging for the night." As he rode toward the Promise Valley Hotel at the end of Main Street, Gabriel's thoughts remained fixed on the woman with the auburn hair and the 6 copper coins. Abigail Lawson. A name that meant nothing to him yesterday, but now stirred an unexpected sense of obligation. He had come to Promise Valley with a singular purpose: to uncover the truth about his brother's death. William had been found hanging from a rafter in his rented room 2 years earlier, an apparent suicide that had never rung true. The official report claimed that William, a brilliant engineer working on the railroad's expansion, had become despondent over technical difficulties with the mountain passage. Gabriel knew better. His brother's last letter, received just days before his death, had spoken of troubling discoveries and men who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. The letter had promised details to follow, but those details had died with William. Now, as the town spread before him in the fading light, Gabriel felt the familiar determination harden within him. He would find the truth, whatever it took. And perhaps, in the process, he would discover why fate had placed Abigail Lawson in his path. Abby climbed the narrow stairs to her room above the Frontier Saloon, exhaustion weighing each step. The night had been busy, with a group of cattle buyers passing through on their way to Denver. Her shoulders ached from carrying trays of drinks, and her ears rang with the remnants of bawdy songs and coarse laughter. Her room, if the cramped space deserved such a designation, was frigid, the small stove in the corner long cold. By the dim light of her single candle, she moved to the window and gazed out at the moonlit town. Fresh snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting past her window like lost spirits. On the sill sat a small envelope that hadn't been there when she left. Frowning, Abby picked it up, breaking the plain wax seal with trembling fingers. She knew what it was before she'd even unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting, precise and formal, confirmed her fears. Notice of termination and eviction, Frontier Saloon, sold to Harrington Holdings, effective March 1st. All current staff to vacate premises by February 15th. No references will be provided. J. McGrath. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to find new work, new lodging, a new life in a town that had already decided what she was worth. Abby sank onto her narrow bed, the letter crumpling in her fist. She'd known this day might come. McGrath had been complaining about declining profits for months, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Winter was the hardest time to find work, with the mines operating skeleton crews and the cattle ranches dormant until spring. With mechanical movements, she retrieved the small tin box from beneath a loose floorboard. Inside lay $27.35, her entire savings. Not enough for the California stagecoach that cost $40, barely enough for winter lodging if she skipped meals. The name on the letter caught her attention again. Harrington Holdings, the same name as the stranger she'd helped that morning. It couldn't be coincidence in a town as small as Promise Valley. A bitter laugh escaped her. Her last 6 coins had gone to feed the very man who had just rendered her homeless. Blowing out the candle to save its precious wax, Abby lay back on the thin mattress and let herself remember, just for a moment, the things she usually kept locked away. The orphan train at 8 years old, her small face pressed against the window, watching her mother's tear-streaked face disappear into the crowd. The Sullivan family farm, with its neat house and promised education that had devolved into endless labor. And then at 16, Charles Sullivan cornering her in the barn, his hands grasping and entitled. His mother's cold eyes when Abby had screamed for help, the word seductress falling from thin lips like a death sentence. The town had believed the family with property over the orphan with nothing. Always did, always would. Abby closed her eyes, calculating survival the way other young women calculated dreams. In the morning, she would speak to Martha. Perhaps the older woman would know of opportunities beyond Promise Valley. Perhaps it was finally time to leave this place that had never truly been home. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a deceptive blanket of purity that would reveal all its flaws and divisions with the coming dawn. Judge Ezekiel Clayton considered himself the architect of Promise Valley's future. At 60 years old, with a shock of silver hair and a bearing that commanded respect, he had spent 3 decades cultivating his position of power. The law was his instrument, but property was his true passion. As he often told his associates, God isn't making any more land, gentlemen. Now, seated in his private office with Mayor Ross and Simmons, Clayton leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers thoughtfully. A railroad man, you say? Simmons nodded eagerly, called himself Gabriel Harrington, said he's with Union Pacific, surveying routes. Clayton's eyes narrowed slightly. Harrington, the name's familiar. Might be related to that engineer who killed himself a couple years back. Mayor Ross suggested. William something or other. William Harrington, Clayton said softly, the memory surfacing. Yes, of course. Troubled young man. Shame about what happened. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Should we be concerned? Ross asked finally. If he's here about the railroad, Clayton waved a dismissive hand. The railroad is inevitable, Thomas. Progress cannot be stopped. The question is whether it serves our interests. A thin smile crossed his features, and I intend to ensure that it does. The land purchases are almost complete, Simmons volunteered. Just a few holdouts on the North Ridge. They'll sell, Clayton said with certainty, one way or another. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered town that had made him wealthy. When he'd arrived 30 years ago, Promise Valley had been little more than a trading post. Now it boasted a bank, a school, a church, and businesses that catered to the growing population. All of it built on land that Clayton had systematically acquired. Find out what this Harrington really wants, he instructed. I don't like surprises. As the men discussed strategy, none of them noticed a small figure huddled beneath the window outside. Tommy Wheeler, who had stopped to retie his boot and found himself an unwitting eavesdropper to powerful men's machinations. The boy slipped away undetected, his young mind racing with questions about railroads and land purchases. Perhaps Miss Abby would know what it all meant. She knew everything, it seemed, especially about numbers and maps. Despite his mother's prohibitions, Tommy resolved to seek her out at the first opportunity. After all, he reasoned, he owed her his life now. Surely that counted for something, even against a mother's decree. The following morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Gabriel stood at the window of his hotel room, watching the town come to life below. Promise Valley presented a picturesque scene. The snow-covered buildings with smoke rising from chimneys, people hurrying along shoveled paths, horse-drawn sleighs moving down Main Street. Yet beneath this postcard perfection, Gabriel sensed currents of tension. Even during his brief interactions since arriving, he'd noticed the careful way people assessed him, measuring his worth and potential usefulness. It was a calculation he recognized from Boston's social circles, though here it lacked the veneer of sophistication. His cover as a railroad survey engineer would grant him access to property records and town plans, critical information if he was to uncover what had really happened to William. But he needed more. He needed to understand the town itself, its power structures and secrets. And if he was honest with himself, he needed to find Abigail Lawson again. Not just to repay her kindness, but because something told him she might have insights others would miss. After a simple breakfast in the hotel dining room, Gabriel made his way to the Promise Valley Bank, where, according to the hotel clerk, he would find Judge Clayton most mornings. The bank occupied an imposing brick building at the town center. Inside, mahogany counters and brass fixtures created an impression of solid prosperity. Gabriel approached the teller, introducing himself and requesting a meeting with the judge. Mr. Harrington of Union Pacific, the teller repeated, eyes widening slightly. Yes, sir. Judge Clayton mentioned you might call. Please follow me. Gabriel was led to a private office at the rear of the building. Judge Clayton rose from behind a massive desk, extending his hand with a practiced smile. Mr. Harrington, Ezekiel Clayton, a pleasure to welcome you to Promise Valley. Gabriel shook the offered hand, taking the man's measure. Clayton was tall and lean, with the erect posture of someone accustomed to authority. His silver hair and neatly trimmed beard gave him a distinguished appearance, while shrewd eyes missed nothing. The pleasure is mine, Judge Clayton. I've heard you're the man to know in Promise Valley. Clayton gestured to a leather chair. Please sit. And yes, I've been fortunate enough to help guide our community's development since the early days. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Now, I understand you're here on railroad business? For the next hour, Gabriel played his role perfectly, discussing potential routes, engineering challenges, and timelines. He watched Clayton carefully, noting how the judge's interest sharpened when certain locations were mentioned. The Northern Ridge would present significant challenges, Gabriel commented, spreading a map on the desk. The grade is steep and the soil composition uncertain. Clayton leaned forward, but not insurmountable, surely. For men of vision and determination? Nothing is insurmountable with sufficient investment, Gabriel replied carefully, though the southern approach through Miller's Pass would be considerably less expensive. A flash of something, displeasure, concern, crossed Clayton's features before disappearing. Miller's Pass has its own challenges, prone to flooding in spring, unstable in places. Interesting. That doesn't align with our preliminary surveys. Clayton waved a dismissive hand. Local knowledge, Mr. Harrington, worth more than any survey at times. The conversation shifted to the economic benefits the railroad would bring, with Clayton expounding on Promise Valley's bright future. Throughout, Gabriel maintained his facade of professional interest while cataloging the judge's subtle reactions. As the meeting concluded, Clayton offered to show Gabriel around town personally. Nothing like seeing Promise Valley through the eyes of someone who truly loves her, he said expansively. Perhaps tomorrow, I have court matters to attend to today. Gabriel accepted graciously, recognizing the opportunity to learn more, while also buying time for his own investigations. As he left the bank, Gabriel's attention was caught by a familiar figure across the street. Abigail Lawson emerged from the general store, her arms empty despite having entered with a basket. Her expression was carefully neutral, but the rigid set of her shoulders spoke volumes. Acting on impulse, Gabriel crossed the street, removing his hat as he approached. Miss Lawson? She turned, surprise momentarily displacing the careful mask. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed immediately by wariness. Mr. Harrington, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I trust you found Simmons' cooking satisfactory? Indeed, thanks to your generosity. He hesitated, uncomfortably aware of curious eyes watching their exchange. I'd like to repay your kindness, if I may. That's not necessary, she replied, already turning to leave. Please, Gabriel said, lowering his voice. I insist, and I believe we may have matters of mutual interest to discuss. Abby paused, studying him with those remarkable eyes, a clear gray that reminded him of dawn breaking over the Atlantic. What matters might those be, Mr. Harrington? The recent sale of the Frontier Saloon, for one. Her expression shuddered immediately. I see news travels fast in Promise Valley. I make it my business to know about my investments, Gabriel replied carefully. Though in this case, I find myself concerned about the consequences for current employees. A bitter smile touched her lips. Your concern comes rather late, Mr. Harrington. Before Gabriel could respond, Mrs. Wheeler appeared with Tommy in tow. The woman stopped short at the sight of Abby, her expression souring. Come along, Tommy, she said sharply, pulling the boy by his arm. We don't associate with her kind. Tommy, however, twisted free and darted toward Abby, his young face earnest. Miss Abby, I wanted to thank you for saving me yesterday. Ma wouldn't let me before, but I... Thomas Wheeler, his mother cut in, face flushed with embarrassment. Get back here this instant. The boy hesitated, torn between obedience and gratitude. Abby solved his dilemma by giving him a gentle smile. You're welcome, Tommy, she said softly. Just stay off the ice from now on, all right? Tommy nodded, then reluctantly rejoined his mother, who seized his arm with punishing force. As they walked away, the boy looked back over his shoulder, his expression confused and troubled. Gabriel had watched the exchange with growing indignation. Does everyone in this town treat you so poorly? He asked when the Wheelers were out of earshot. Abby's gaze returned to him, measuring and cautious. You'll find Promise Valley quite traditional in its values, Mr. Harrington. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. Wait, Gabriel said, making a swift decision. I have a proposition for you, Miss Lawson. A business proposition, he clarified, seeing her expression harden. Would you grant me a few minutes of your time, perhaps at the hotel restaurant, where we might speak privately? Abby hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded once. Very well, Mr. Harrington. Tomorrow at noon. I have work until then. Thank you, Gabriel said sincerely. I promise you won't regret it. As she walked away, Gabriel became aware of whispers and stares directed his way. His brief interaction with Abigail Lawson had apparently violated some unwritten rule of Promise Valley society. Good, he thought grimly. Perhaps it was time someone challenged the rules in this town. Starting with discovering why a woman of obvious intelligence and character was treated as an outcast. Returning to his hotel, Gabriel requested stationery and began drafting a letter to his law partner in Boston. If he was to move forward with both his investigation and his unexpected interest in the Frontier Saloon, he would need legal documentation expedited. As twilight settled over Promise Valley, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a study in blue shadows, Gabriel found his thoughts repeatedly returning to Abigail Lawson and the quiet dignity with which she faced the town's contempt. There was a mystery there, one that might, he suspected, connect in unexpected ways to his search for William's killers. In the small room above the saloon, Abby prepared for her shift, mind racing with questions about Gabriel Harrington and his sudden appearance in Promise Valley. The coincidence seemed too great. First his arrival, then the sale of the Frontier. Yet something about him suggested honesty, despite his obvious wealth and education. Tomorrow's meeting might provide answers, but Abby knew better than to hope for salvation from any man, no matter how well-intentioned. In her experience, good intentions paved roads to places far worse than hell. Still, as she descended to the saloon floor, a small, treacherous spark of curiosity had ignited within her, the first such feeling she'd allowed herself in years. Martha Coleman's small house perched on the eastern hill overlooking Promise Valley, its weathered clapboards testament to decades of harsh mountain winters. Inside, however, warmth and knowledge flourished. Every available surface held books, novels, scientific journals, histories, poetry collections, each one precious in a frontier town where reading material remained scarce. This evening, Martha sat at her kitchen table across from Abby, regarding the eviction notice with troubled eyes. "Harrington Holdings," the older woman murmured. "And you say he's staying at the hotel? This Gabriel Harrington?" Abby nodded, cradling a cup of Martha's chamomile tea between her palms. "Arrived yesterday. Says he's with the railroad." Martha's expression grew distant, fingers unconsciously touching the locket she always wore, the one containing her late husband's portrait. "Railroad men," she said softly. "They change everything they touch." "He's offered me a job," Abby admitted. "I'm meeting him tomorrow to discuss it." Martha's attention snapped back to the present. "What kind of job?" "I don't know. Some kind of assistant position, I expect. He said it was a business proposition." The older woman's face creased with concern. "Be careful, Abigail. Men in positions of power often have expectations that aren't stated in employment contracts." Abby's smile held no humor. "I'm well aware, Martha. I've fended off enough drunks at the Frontier to recognize when a man wants more than conversation. And yet you agreed to meet him." "I have 2 weeks to find new work and lodging," Abby replied practically. "I can't afford to dismiss any opportunity, no matter how suspect." Martha sighed, reaching across the table to clasp Abby's hand. "You deserve so much better than this town has given you." "Life isn't about deserving," Abby said, the words automatic after years of repetition. "It's about surviving. It should be about more than survival." Martha rose, moving to a cupboard from which she extracted a worn leather ledger. "I have something to show you." She opened the ledger, revealing columns of neat figures. "The Wheeler mercantile accounts. Mrs. Wheeler brought them to me last week, asking if I could make sense of them. Her husband always handled the finances before he passed." Abby leaned forward, scanning the numbers with practiced ease. "There's a discrepancy here," she noted, pointing to an entry. "And here. Someone's been skimming from the inventory." Martha nodded approvingly. "Exactly what I found." Mrs. Wheeler was most grateful for the information. "You told her I helped with the accounting?" Abby asked, alarmed. "Of course not. She'd never accept it." Martha closed the ledger. "My point is that your skills with numbers are exceptional, Abby. Perhaps this Harrington man has recognized that talent." "Perhaps," Abby conceded, though skepticism colored her tone. "Or perhaps he simply wants to ease his conscience about the evictions." "Either way, hear him out," Martha advised. "But don't sell yourself short. You're worth more than whatever he initially offers." As Abby prepared to leave, Martha handed her another book, this one on railway engineering. "For your collection," she said with a conspirator's smile. "Knowledge is never wasted." Outside, the night had deepened, stars pricking the black velvet sky with diamond clarity. Abby paused on Martha's porch, breathing in the clean mountain air and savoring a moment of peace before returning to the noise and smoke of the saloon. From this vantage point, Promise Valley spread below, lamplight glowing in windows like earthbound stars. It might have been beautiful if she didn't know the judgments and cruelties that festered behind those warm lights. For a moment, Abby allowed herself to imagine a different life, perhaps as a teacher in San Francisco or a bookkeeper in Denver. Somewhere her intelligence would be valued rather than feared, her independence respected rather than condemned. The fantasy faded as reality reasserted itself. She had $27.35 to her name and 2 weeks to secure her future. Dreams were a luxury she couldn't afford. With resolute steps, Abby began the walk back to town, the borrowed book tucked safely inside her coat. Whatever Gabriel Harrington proposed tomorrow, she would evaluate it with clear-eyed pragmatism. Survival first. Dreams could wait. The Cattleman's Hotel dining room represented Promise Valley's attempt at sophistication. White tablecloths and silver cutlery created an atmosphere of restrained elegance, while the large windows offered views of the snow-covered town square and distant mountains. Gabriel arrived early for his meeting with Abigail Lawson, securing a corner table that afforded privacy while remaining visible enough to maintain proprieties. He had spent the morning reviewing property records at the county clerk's office, discovering that Judge Clayton's name appeared with surprising frequency on deeds throughout the valley, often as the beneficiary of transactions conducted under financial duress. More troublingly, he had found William's name on a mining claim filed just 3 days before his death, a claim that had subsequently been transferred to Clayton through a document bearing his brother's signature, a signature that, to Gabriel's practiced eye, appeared suspect. His thoughts were interrupted as the dining room suddenly quieted. Abigail Lawson stood in the doorway, her simple blue dress a stark contrast to the elaborate fashions of the few other female diners. She held herself with remarkable poise, despite the stares and whispers that tracked her progress across the room. Gabriel rose as she approached, pulling out her chair with a courtesy that clearly surprised her. "Thank you for coming, Miss Lawson," he said as they were seated. "Your note mentioned a job opportunity, Mr. Harrington," she replied directly. "Given my current circumstances, I could hardly refuse." The waiter appeared, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious disapproval in his eyes as he regarded Abby. Gabriel ordered for both of them, noting how Abby's shoulders tensed slightly at the presumption before relaxing as he selected simple, hearty fare rather than the most expensive offerings. When they were alone again, Gabriel leaned forward slightly. "First, I must apologize for the distress my company's purchase of the Frontier has caused you. Had I known of your situation, I might have arranged matters differently." "You own Harrington Holdings?" Abby asked, her gray eyes sharp with intelligence. "I do. It's a small investment company I established several years ago. The Frontier purchase was arranged by my agent based on financial projections." He paused. "I'm actually in Promise Valley on other business entirely." "The railroad," Abby supplied. "You mentioned that to Judge Clayton." Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. "News does travel quickly here. It's a small town, Mr. Harrington. Secrets are a luxury few can afford." The waiter returned with coffee, serving Gabriel first before reluctantly filling Abby's cup. When he had gone, Gabriel continued, choosing his words carefully. "I find myself in need of assistance during my stay in Promise Valley. Someone with local knowledge, discretion, and, if I may be direct, someone with more insight than most residents seem willing to share with outsiders." Abby regarded him steadily. "And you think I'm that person? A saloon girl whom the respectable people cross the street to avoid?" "I think you're someone who observes more than she says, who understands numbers and patterns, and who isn't blinded by the same prejudices as her neighbors." Gabriel met her gaze directly. "Am I wrong?" A faint smile touched her lips. "You're perceptive, Mr. Harrington." "Gabriel, please. If we're to work together, formality seems unnecessary. And what exactly would this work entail?" "Gabriel?" His name sounded tentative on her lips, as though testing unfamiliar territory. "Administrative assistance primarily, correspondence, record-keeping, research. I've leased a house on the edge of town to serve as my office while I'm here. You would work there during daylight hours only, with Sundays free." Food arrived, momentarily halting their conversation. Gabriel noted how carefully Abby ate, with the precise manners of someone who had received proper training at some point in her past. "The compensation would be $40 per month," he continued, when the waiter had again retreated. Paid weekly, with the first week in advance. Abby's fork paused halfway to her mouth. $40? It was a generous sum, nearly triple what she earned at the saloon. Too generous, perhaps, which clearly triggered her suspicion. The work requires discretion and intelligence, Gabriel said simply. I believe in paying fairly for valuable skills. And what of my reputation? Abby asked bluntly. Working closely with a single gentleman will hardly improve how the town views me. I thought that might concern you, which is why the position includes lodging in the caretaker's cottage behind the main house. Separate entrance, complete privacy, but close enough to maintain propriety through proximity to the housekeeper. Abby set down her fork entirely. You've thought of everything. I try to be thorough. And what do you get from this arrangement, beyond administrative assistance that any number of more respectable citizens could provide? Gabriel considered his response carefully. Honesty, he said finally, something I suspect is in short supply in Promise Valley. Their eyes held for a long moment, a silent assessment passing between them. Finally, Abby spoke. When would this position begin? Immediately, if you're willing. The cottage is furnished and ready for occupancy. Abby took a sip of her coffee, clearly weighing her options. I would need to give notice at the frontier. Already taken care of. As the new owner, I've instructed management that you're to be released from your obligations immediately, with 2 weeks' wages as compensation. Her eyebrows rose. You were that certain I'd accept? Not at all, Gabriel admitted with a small smile. But I believed in being prepared for the possibility. Another silence fell as Abby considered the offer. Gabriel waited, recognizing the importance of this moment. He needed her help. Her insights into the town and its power structures could prove invaluable to his investigation. But beyond that practical consideration, he found himself genuinely wanting to help this remarkable woman who had shown such unexpected kindness to a stranger. I accept, Abby said finally, on a trial basis, 1 month, after which either of us may terminate the arrangement without prejudice. Gabriel nodded, relieved. Agreed. Shall we shake on it? He extended his hand across the table. After a moment's hesitation, Abby placed her smaller one in his. Her grip was firm and brief, her skin calloused from work, but still distinctly feminine. I'll have a carriage sent for your belongings this afternoon, Gabriel said as they concluded their meal. And Miss Lawson, Abby, she interrupted, if we're dispensing with formality. Abby, he amended with a smile, thank you for your trust. I promise you won't regret it. As they parted outside the hotel, Gabriel watched her walk away, back straight and head high despite the sideways glances from passers-by. He had told her the truth about the position and its requirements, but not the whole truth about his presence in Promise Valley. That revelation would have to wait until he better understood her connections to the town and its secrets. Until he could be certain that Abigail Lawson was not only observant and intelligent, but truly trustworthy with the real purpose behind his sudden appearance in Promise Valley. For now, he had secured a valuable ally and perhaps provided a deserving woman with an opportunity for a fresh start. Not a bad day's work, Gabriel reflected as he turned toward the bank to continue his investigations into Judge Clayton's financial dealings. Behind him, unnoticed, Tommy Wheeler ducked into an alley, his young face alight with excitement at what he had witnessed. Miss Abby was going to work for the railroad man. Maybe now she could teach him about engineering like he'd been hoping. His mother's prohibitions notwithstanding, Tommy was determined to pursue knowledge wherever he could find it. And somewhere across town, Judge Clayton received word of the meeting from one of his many informants, his expression darkening as he considered the implications of Gabriel Harrington's interest in Abigail Lawson, a woman who knew far too much about reading and figures for Clayton's comfort. Keep an eye on them both, he instructed Mayor Ross. I want to know everything they do, everywhere they go. The pieces were moving on Promise Valley's chessboard, invisible strategies unfolding as snow continued to blanket the town in deceptive tranquility. The white clapboard house Gabriel had leased sat at the eastern edge of Promise Valley, where civilization yielded to wilderness. 2 stories tall with green shutters and a wide porch, it projected an air of solid respectability. Behind it, partially hidden by snow-laden pine trees, stood the caretaker's cottage, a simple one-room structure with its own small porch and chimney. Abby stood in the cottage doorway, surveying what would be her home for at least the next month. A cast-iron stove occupied one corner, a narrow bed another. A small table with two chairs sat beneath the window, while a pine armoire provided the only storage. Simple, but clean and solid, far better accommodations than her room above the saloon. The meager belongings she'd accumulated over 3 years had arrived earlier in Gabriel's carriage. Two dresses, undergarments, a shawl, a pair of worn boots, and the precious books Martha had given her, carefully wrapped in brown paper to conceal their contents. "Will it suit?" Gabriel asked, standing respectfully outside. "It's more than adequate," Abby replied, turning to face him. "Thank you." Gabriel nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "Mrs. Fleming, the housekeeper, has prepared supper. You are welcome to join us in the main house, or she can bring a tray here if you prefer privacy tonight." Abby hesitated. Dining with her employer on her first night seemed improper. Yet isolating herself might establish a precedent of separation she didn't necessarily want. This position represented not just financial security, but a chance to be treated as something other than the saloon girl. "I'll join you," she decided, "after I've had a chance to settle in." "Excellent. 7 o'clock then. Nothing formal." Gabriel turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and the office is ready whenever you wish to see it. Second floor, east side. I believe you will find it satisfactory." Alone in the cottage, Abby moved methodically through the space, arranging her few possessions and familiarizing herself with her new surroundings. The bed had a proper feather mattress, luxury compared to the straw-filled pallet she'd endured for years. Clean linens, a patchwork quilt, and even a small rag rug beside the bed created a sense of comfort she had almost forgotten. As she unpacked, her fingers brushed against the small tin box containing her savings. $27.35, plus the 2 weeks' wages Gabriel Rio had arranged. Nearly $50 total. Not a fortune, but more security than she'd had in years. For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, Abby allowed herself to breathe freely. Whatever Gabrielle Harrington's true motives, he had granted her precious time and opportunity. She would use both wisely. At precisely 7, Abby knocked on the main house's back door. Mrs. Fleming, a stout, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, showed her to the dining room where Gabriel awaited. The table was set simply but elegantly, with good china and polished silver that reflected the lamplight. Gabriel rose as she entered, pulling out her chair with the same natural courtesy he had shown at the hotel. "I hope you found everything to your liking," he said as Mrs. Fleming served a hearty stew accompanied by fresh bread. "Very much so," Abby replied, "though I admit to curiosity about what brings a Boston businessman to Promise Valley in the depths of winter." Gabriel smiled slightly. "Direct and observant. I didn't mention Boston at our luncheon. Your accent places you in New England, your clothing was tailored in an Eastern style, and you carry yourself with the confidence of someone accustomed to urban society." Abby buttered a piece of bread. Boston seemed the most logical conclusion. "Impressive deduction," Gabriel acknowledged. "You're right, of course. I was born and raised in Boston, educated at Harvard, and practiced law there until my father's death 5 years ago, when I took over the family's investment business." "A lawyer by training, then. That explains your careful speech." Gabriel inclined his head. "We all have histories that shape us, Miss Lawson, Abby. I suspect yours is equally informative." Abby's expression cooled slightly. "My past is unremarkable, I assure you." "I doubt that very much." Gabriel took a sip of water. "But I respect your privacy. You'll find I'm not inclined to promo." The tension eased, and conversation shifted to more neutral topics. The town's history, the severe winter, the changes the railroad might bring. Throughout, Abby noted Gabriel's intelligence and genuine curiosity. Unlike most men she'd encountered, he listened when she spoke, considering her observations with respect rather than dismissal. After dinner, Gabriel suggested they review the office and her duties for the coming days. The second-floor room overlooked the snow-covered valley, mountains rising majestically in the distance. A large desk occupied the center, while bookshelves lined one wall. A smaller writing desk had been positioned near the window, clearly intended for her use. "Your primary responsibilities will involve organizing correspondence, maintaining records, and researching property transactions," Gabriel explained. opening a leather portfolio. I'm particularly interested in land sales over the past 5 years, especially those involving Judge Clayton or Mayor Ross. Abby's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting focus. Is it? Gabriel's expression revealed nothing. Judge Clayton is involved in most significant transactions in Promise Valley. His position gives him advanced knowledge of developments that might affect property values. A convenient arrangement for a man with investment interest, Gabriel observed. Abby studied him thoughtfully. The railroad survey isn't your only purpose here, is it, Mr. Harrington? For a moment, Gabriel seemed to debate with himself. Finally, he moved to close the office door, ensuring their privacy. No, he admitted, though the survey is legitimate, Union Pacific has contracted with my company to assess potential roads. What then? Gabriel hesitated, then reached into a drawer, withdrawing a daguerreotype in a small silver frame. He placed it on the desk before her. The image showed a younger version of Gabriel standing beside another man, similar in appearance, though slighter in build and with a more serious expression. Both wore the formal attire typical of an expensive portrait sitting. My brother William, Gabriel said softly. 2 years ago, he was found hanging in his room at the Promise Valley Hotel. The official determination was suicide. Abby studied the image, recognition dawning. The engineer, she murmured. I remember. There was talk. What kind of talk? Gabriel asked sharply. Abby chose her words carefully. Some thought it strange. He had seemed enthusiastic about his work, not despondent. He wasn't suicidal, Gabriel stated flatly. William wrote to me just days before his death. He mentioned discovering something significant, something that certain people would stop at nothing to protect. His jaw tightened. 3 days later, he was dead. Understanding bloomed. You're here to investigate his death. I'm here for justice, Gabriel corrected. William was brilliant, dedicated. The official story that he became depressed over technical difficulties with the rail passage never rang true. He had solved far more complex problems before. Abby considered this revelation, its implications rippling outward. And you believe Judge Clayton was involved? I don't know yet, but William's last letter mentioned men of influence, who stood to gain enormously from controlling knowledge about the railroad route. In Promise Valley, that description fits a very small group. It's dangerous to challenge powerful men, Abby said quietly, especially when you're an outsider. Some things are worth the risk. Gabriel's eyes held a determination that stirred something in Abby, something she had thought long extinguished. The question is, Miss Lawson, whether you're willing to help me uncover the truth, knowing the potential consequences. Abby looked again at the photograph, at two brothers standing together in happier times, and thought of all the injustices she had witnessed in Promise Valley. The Sullivan family's lies, Mrs. Wheeler's cruelty, Judge Clayton's manipulation of property and lives. I'll help you, she said firmly, but we must be careful. Promise Valley protects its own secrets fiercely. Relief washed over Gabriel's features. Thank you. Your knowledge of the town and its people will be invaluable. We should start with the mining claim, Abby suggested. If your brother found something significant enough to die for, it was likely valuable enough to leave records. Gabriel's eyebrows rose. How did you know about the mining claim? I didn't, Abby admitted. But this valley was initially settled during the Silver Rush. Every major dispute in Promise Valley's history has involved either water rights or mineral rights. A smile of genuine admiration crossed Gabriel's face. Logical deduction indeed, you're right. William filed a claim 3 days before his death. It was transferred to Judge Clayton afterward, purportedly through a document signed by my brother. May I see the signature? Gabriel produced a copy of the transfer document. Abby studied it carefully, comparing the signature with a letter William had written that Gabriel also provided. The slant is wrong, she said after several moments, and the pressure points don't match. Whoever signed this was attempting to imitate your brother's hand, but they pressed too hard on the downstrokes. You have experience with handwriting analysis? Gabriel asked, impressed. A shadow passed over Abby's face. Let's just say I've had reason to verify the authenticity of signatures before. Before Gabriel could inquire further, a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Fleming entered with a tea tray, her presence dispelling the intensity of the moment. "I thought you might appreciate some refreshment," the housekeeper said, setting down the tray. Her eyes darted between them, assessing the situation with the practiced perception of a servant accustomed to reading moods. "Thank you, Mrs. Fleming," Gabriel said warmly. "That was thoughtful." When they were alone again, the conversation shifted to more practical matters. The organization of records, schedules for the coming week, and the establishment of a cover story to explain Abby's position to curious townspeople. "Administrative assistant to the railroad survey team," Gabriel suggested. "Close enough to the truth to be sustainable." "And my living arrangements?" Abby asked practically. "The town will talk." "Let them. Ms. Fleming provides adequate chaperonage, and your cottage ensures proper separation. Besides," he added with a touch of cynicism, "Promise Valley has already judged you. Their opinion can hardly fall lower." "True enough," Abby acknowledged, though the reminder stung. As the evening concluded, Gabriel walked Abby back to her cottage, a lantern illuminating their path through the snow. They paused at her door, the silence between them comfortable, yet charged with the weight of their new alliance. "Tomorrow we begin in earnest," Gabriel said. "I appreciate your willingness to trust me, Abby." "I haven't decided whether to trust you entirely," she replied honestly. "But I believe in justice, and I believe your brother deserves it." Gabriel nodded, understanding her caution. "Fair enough. Good night, then." "Good night, Gabriel." As his footsteps crunched away through the snow, Abby entered her cottage, mind whirling with the day's revelations. She had aligned herself with Gabriel's quest for truth, a dangerous position in a town built on carefully maintained lies. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something beyond the dull determination to survive. Purpose. And perhaps, though she scarcely dared acknowledge it, the faintest flicker of hope. Tommy Wheeler pressed his face against the frosted window of the general store, watching the street with impatient eagerness. When he finally spotted Abby walking purposefully toward the post office, he slipped outside, careful to ensure his mother remained occupied with fabric selections inside. "Miss Abby," he called, hurrying to catch up. Abby turned, surprise giving way to a warm smile as she recognized the boy. "Tommy, should you be out alone in this cold?" "Ma's shopping," he explained, falling into step beside her. "Miss Abby, is it true you're working for the railroad man now?" Word traveled fast in Promise Valley, Abby reflected ruefully. "Mr. Harrington has hired me as his assistant." "Yes." Tommy's eyes widened with excitement. "For the railroad? Will there really be trains coming through Promise Valley, with steam engines and everything?" "That's what Mr. Harrington is here to determine," Abby replied, charmed by the boy's enthusiasm. "But such decisions take time." "I've been reading about locomotives," Tommy confided, "about how they work, the steam pressure, and the pistons." He hesitated, then added in a rush, "Ma doesn't approve. Says it's not practical knowledge for a shopkeeper's son." Abby heard the disappointment in his voice, recognizing a kindred spirit, a curious mind constrained by others' limited expectations. "Knowledge is never wasted, Tommy," she said gently, "no matter what anyone says." The boy beamed at her endorsement. "That's what I think too. Miss Abby, could I maybe see the railroad plans sometime, or books about engineering? I know Mr. Harrington must have some." Abby glanced around, aware of curious eyes tracking their conversation. "That might be difficult, considering your mother's feelings about me." "I could come when she's at her ladies' circle," Tommy suggested eagerly. "Tuesdays and Thursdays. She never misses it." Before Abby could respond, Mrs. Wheeler's voice cut across the street. "Thomas, come here this instant." The woman stood outside the general store, her face a mask of disapproval as she took in the scene before her. Tommy's shoulders slumped. "You'd better go," Abby said quietly. "But Tommy," she hesitated, then continued. "Martha Coleman has quite a collection of books on various subjects. She might welcome a visitor interested in learning." Tommy's expression brightened momentarily before schooling itself into the dutiful mask his mother expected. "Yes, ma'am," he said at normal volume, then added in a whisper, "Thank you, Miss Abby." As the boy trotted obediently back to his mother, Abby continued toward the post office, aware of Mrs. Wheeler's glare burning into her back. The encounter reinforced the precariousness of her position in Promise Valley. Any action, however innocent, could be interpreted through the lens of existing prejudice. Inside the post office, Abby presented the letters Gabriel had given her to mail. The postmaster, Mr. Collins, regarded her with surprise. "Working for the railroad man now, are you?" he asked, not bothering to hide his curiosity. "Mr. Harrington required administrative assistance," Abby replied neutrally. Collins raised bushy eyebrows as he weighed the letters. "Quite a change from serving drinks at the frontier." "Life is full of unexpected opportunities, Mr. Collins." "Indeed it is." His tone suggested skepticism rather than agreement, though some might question the propriety of such an arrangement. Abby met his gaze steadily. "Fortunately, my employment doesn't require public approval, only Mr. Harrington's satisfaction with my work." Flustered by her directness, Collins completed the transaction in silence. As Abby turned to leave, she nearly collided with Judge Clayton entering the post office. "Miss Lawson," the judge acknowledged with cool politeness, "I understand congratulations are in order on your new position." "Thank you, Judge Clayton," Abby replied, matching his formal tone. The judge studied her, his pale eyes calculating behind a veneer of benevolent interest. "A significant advancement. Mr. Harrington must have recognized unusual qualities in you." The insinuation hung in the air, but Abby refused to dignify it with a reaction. "Mr. Harrington values efficiency and discretion. Good day, Judge Clayton." She moved past him, maintaining her composure until she was outside. Only then did she allow herself a deep breath, steadying nerves frayed by the encounter. Clayton's interest confirmed Gabriel's suspicions. The judge was monitoring them both. Abby completed her remaining errands swiftly, collecting mail from Gabriel's box and purchasing supplies from the stationery shop. Throughout, she felt the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. By the time she returned to the house at the edge of town, tension had settled between her shoulder blades like a physical weight. In the office, Gabriel looked up from a map spread across his desk. "Successful expedition?" "The mail has been sent," Abby reported, placing the incoming correspondence and supplies on her desk. "And the entire town now knows of my employment and living arrangements." Gabriel's expression tightened. "Were there problems?" "Nothing unexpected. Promise Valley thrives on gossip. An unmarried man and woman in close proximity provides excellent fodder, especially when the woman already possesses a questionable reputation." "I'm sorry," Gabriel said quietly. "Perhaps I shouldn't have asked this of you." "You didn't force me," Abby reminded him, removing her coat and gloves. "I chose this position with full awareness of the potential consequences." She paused, then added more softly, "Besides, it's hardly the first time I've been the subject of town gossip." Gabriel studied her thoughtfully. "You mentioned that your past was unremarkable, but I suspect that's not entirely accurate." Abby's hands stilled in their task of organizing papers. "We all have histories, Mr. Harrington. Some are simply less pleasant to recall than others." "Gabriel," he corrected gently, "and yes, that's true, but sometimes sharing burdens makes them lighter." For a moment, Abby considered deflecting the implied question. Her past was a locked room she rarely entered willingly. Yet something about Gabriel's genuine concern, so different from the town's prurient curiosity, loosened the tight control she maintained over those memories. "I came west on an orphan train when I was 8, she said finally, focusing on straightening papers that needed no adjustment. "My mother put me on it after my father died. She said it was temporary, just until she could establish herself somewhere. I never saw her again." Gabriel remained silent, giving her space to continue or stop as she chose. "The Sullivan family took me in," Abby continued after a moment. "James and Margaret Sullivan. They had a farm about 20 miles east of here. They promised education, family, a future." A bitter smile touched her lips. What they wanted was unpaid labor. "I'm sorry," Gabriel said quietly. Abby shrugged, the gesture dismissive though her eyes revealed deeper pain. "It wasn't uncommon. Many orphan train children face similar circumstances. I was luckier than some. At least I was fed and housed adequately." "Until," Gabriel prompted, sensing there was more to the story. Abby's gaze fixed on the distant mountains visible through the window. "Until I was 16 and their son Charles decided I owed him more than just cooking and cleaning." Her voice had flattened, emotion carefully excised. "When I fought back, Mrs. Sullivan called me a seductress, a Jezebel. They cast me out with nothing but the clothes I wore." Gabriel's expression darkened with anger. And no one intervened? Questioned their story? The Sullivans owned the largest farm in the county. This was being groomed for political office. Abby's smile held no humor. Who would believe an orphan girl over such a respectable family? So you came to Promise Valley. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. Mr. McGrath at the frontier offered me work, the only work a girl with my history could get. She finally turned to face Gabriel directly. I've been there ever since, saving what I could, learning what I could from Martha Coleman's books, and enduring the town's judgment of a situation they never bothered to understand. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Gabriel had trusted her with his purpose in Promise Valley. She had reciprocated with her own painful truth. Thank you for telling me, Gabriel said finally. It can't have been easy. It wasn't, Abby acknowledged, but you're right. Some burdens do feel lighter when shared. She straightened, visibly setting aside the vulnerable moment. Now, shall we get to work? I believe we have mining claims to investigate. Gabriel recognized and respected her need to shift focus. Indeed we do. I found something interesting in the county records. A discrepancy between William's original claim and the version that appears in Judge Clayton's name. For the remainder of the afternoon, they worked side by side, comparing documents and mapping property boundaries. Their earlier conversation had altered something between them, establishing a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that transcended their formal employment relationship. We should visit the claim site, he suggested. See firsthand what William might have discovered. The northern ridge is treacherous in winter, Abby cautioned. We'd need an experienced guide. As they worked into the evening, neither Gabriel nor Abby noticed the small figure watching from behind the pine tree outside the office window. Tommy Wheeler had followed Martha's directions to Gabriel's house, his curiosity about railroads and engineering drawing him like a magnet despite his mother's strict prohibitions. The boy's keen eyes widened as he caught glimpses of the maps and diagrams spread across the desk. Railroad plans, just as he'd hoped. He crouched lower when Gabriel approached the window, holding his breath until the man turned away. Tommy had developed a talent for moving unnoticed, a necessary skill when your mother forbade your most passionate interests. He'd been practicing this talent by following Judge Clayton and Mayor Ross during their private meetings behind the general store, collecting snippets of adult conversations that made little sense individually, but formed an intriguing puzzle when pieced together. Northern Ridge, he whispered to himself, memorizing the location Gabriel had marked on the map. Tunnel 7. The words meant nothing to him yet, but Tommy recorded everything in the small notebook he kept hidden in his boot, the same notebook where he sketched locomotive designs and calculated steam pressures with surprising accuracy for a 12-year-old. As darkness deepened and the office lamps burned lower, Tommy reluctantly headed home, his mind racing with new questions. Why was Miss Abby helping the railroad man? What were they looking for on the Northern Ridge? And why did they keep mentioning his mother's employer, Judge Clayton, with such concern? Gabriel considered his response to Abby's caution about the ridge. Do you know someone trustworthy? Someone who wouldn't report our interests to Judge Clayton? Abby thought for a moment. Martha's late husband was a mining engineer. She might know the area herself or could recommend someone reliable. Excellent. Perhaps we could call on her tomorrow, Gabriel suggested. I'd like to meet this woman who's clearly had such a positive influence on you. Abby nodded, pleased at the prospect of introducing two people she admired. She's remarkable. You'll like her, I think. As they concluded the day's work, a comfortable silence settled between them. The silence of two people who had moved beyond polite distance into something approaching friendship. Whatever challenges Promise Valley might present, Abby realized, she would no longer face them entirely alone. Martha Coleman's cottage welcomed them the following afternoon with the scent of baking bread and the warmth of a well-tended fire. The elderly woman greeted Gabriel with dignified courtesy, assessing him with the shrewd gaze of a teacher accustomed to reading character. So you're the railroad man who's stolen my best student, she said after introductions were complete. I trust you appreciate her abilities appropriately. I'm discovering new ones daily, Gabriel replied with genuine admiration. Abby mentioned you might help us understand the Northern Ridge area. We're particularly interested in mining claims there. Martha's expression sharpened. Mining claims? That's an odd concern for a railroad survey. Gabriel exchanged a glance with Abby, who nodded slightly, permission to share their true purpose. My interest is more personal than professional, Mrs. Coleman, Gabriel admitted. My brother William was the engineer who died here 2 years ago. I have reason to believe his death wasn't suicide, but was connected to a mining claim he filed shortly before his death. Martha sank slowly into a rocking chair, one hand rising to touch the locket at her throat. William Harrington, she murmured. I knew him, you know. Yeah. A brilliant young man, passionate about his work. Her eyes grew distant with memory. He visited me several times. We discussed books, engineering problems. He reminded me of my husband. You never mentioned knowing him, Abby said, surprised. Some connections are too painful to revisit, Martha replied softly. My Robert, my husband, died working on the Transcontinental Railroad. When I heard about William's death, it brought everything back. Gabriel leaned forward. Mrs. Coleman, did William ever mention discovering something unusual? Something that might have put him in danger? Martha's gaze refocused on Gabriel's face, studying him intently. He was excited during his last visit. Said he'd found evidence of a significant silver deposit on the North Ridge, one that didn't appear on any existing surveys. That would be valuable information, Abby noted, especially to someone planning to invest in railroad-adjacent property, or someone who already owns surrounding parcels, Gabriel added grimly. Judge Clayton, perhaps. Martha's expression grew troubled. Judge Clayton has always taken a keen interest in mining operations around Promise Valley, dating back to the first silver strike in '65. She rose and moved to a bookshelf, withdrawing a worn leather volume. Robert kept detailed journals of his geological surveys. The northern ridges mapped here, though these date back 20 years. As Gabriel examined the journal, Martha continued, William asked to borrow these during his last visit, returned them the day before she paused, before he died. Was there anything unusual about his behavior that day? Gabriel asked. He seemed tense, preoccupied. Martha's brow furrowed in concentration. He said something odd as he was leaving. Sometimes what isn't on a map is more valuable than what is. I didn't understand the significance then. Gabriel and Abby exchanged meaningful glances. Could he have discovered a vein that wasn't documented, Abby suggested? Something rich enough to kill for? Or something else entirely, Gabriel mused. William's expertise was railroads, not mining. What would he recognize that others might miss? Martha moved to a trunk in the corner, opening it to reveal a collection of rolled maps and documents. These were Robert's professional papers. If you're serious about investigating the ridge, these might help identify what William found. As they spread the maps across Martha's table, the elderly woman regarded Gabriel with newfound intensity. You believe he was murdered, don't you? I do, Gabriel admitted. The question is by whom and why. Promise Valley has its share of secrets, Martha said quietly. Some buried as deep as the silver that built it. She hesitated, then added, Judge Clayton wasn't always the power he is now. He arrived during the silver rush, a young lawyer with ambition but little else. His rise coincided with several suspicious deaths and property transfers. You're suggesting a pattern, Abby noted. I'm suggesting you both be extremely careful, Martha replied. Clayton didn't achieve his position by allowing obstacles to remain in his path. The warning hung in the air as they continued examining the maps. Gabriel identified the location of William's claim, comparing it with surrounding properties already owned by Clayton. It's an island in the middle of Clayton's holdings, he observed. If William's claim contained significant value, it would have disrupted whatever Clayton was planning. And now the claim belongs to Clayton, Abby reminded him, through a signature I'm certain was forged. Martha watched their exchange with growing concern. What do you intend to do with this information? Prove that William was murdered, Gabriel stated firmly, and expose whoever was responsible. A dangerous undertaking, Martha cautioned, but perhaps a necessary one. She rolled up one of the maps, securing it with a leather tie. Take this. It shows the old mining tunnels beneath the ridge, access points that might not appear on newer surveys. As they prepared to leave, Martha took Abby's hands in her own. Be careful, dear one. Some truths come at terrible cost. I know, Abby assured her, but as you've always taught me, knowledge is never wasted. Martha smiled sadly. Indeed, though sometimes it is hard-won. She turned to Gabriel. Your brother was a good man, Mr. Harrington. He deserves justice. Thank you, Gabriel replied, deeply moved by the old woman's support. For everything. Outside, as they settled into Gabriel's carriage for the journey back, Abby noticed a small figure watching from behind the general store across the street. Tommy Wheeler, his young face alight with curiosity. She raised her hand in a subtle greeting, which the boy returned before disappearing into the alley. We're being observed, Abby commented, not just by Tommy. Gabriel followed her gaze, noting two men loitering near the saloon, their attention far too casual to be genuine. Clayton's men? Most likely. Our visit to Martha won't go unreported. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Then we'll need to move quickly. How soon can we reach the northern ridge? With proper preparation tomorrow, Abby replied, though the weather makes it risky this time of year. Some risks are necessary, Gabriel said, his voice resolute. William deserves the truth, and so do you, Abby. As the carriage pulled away from Martha's cottage, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a precipice, one from which there would be no easy retreat. Whatever William had discovered on that ridge had cost him his life. The question remained whether the truth was worth the same price for those who sought it now. Behind them, in her small cottage, Martha Coleman held her locket, the one containing not just her husband's portrait, but a small key, a key to a safety deposit box at the Promise Valley Bank. A box containing documents William Harrington had entrusted to her the day before his death. Documents she had never dared to examine, knowing instinctively that their contents had proven fatal once already. The following morning, as Abby sorted correspondence in the office, a soft tapping at the back door interrupted her concentration. She opened it to find Tommy Wheeler, cap pulled low over his eyes, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Tommy, what are you doing here? She asked, quickly ushering him inside before any passerby could notice. I brought something, the boy said, reaching into his coat to withdraw a folded paper. Found it in Judge Clayton's carriage when I was helping Mr. Simmons deliver groceries yesterday. Abby unfolded the paper to reveal a rough sketch of the northern ridge with markings that corresponded precisely to the area they were investigating. Several notations in Clayton's distinctive handwriting indicated guard positions and inspection schedule. Tommy, do you understand what this means? She asked, studying the boy's earnest face. That the judge doesn't want people going to that old mine, he replied matter-of-factly, and he's got men watching it. Gabriel entered from the adjoining room, his expression shifting from surprise to keen interest as Abby explained Tommy's discovery. You've taken a considerable risk bringing this to us, he told the boy, his tone serious but kind. Judge Clayton wouldn't be pleased. Tommy straightened his shoulders. Miss Abby saved my life. Ma says I should still stay away from her, but that doesn't seem right. He hesitated, then added, besides, I heard the judge telling Mayor Ross that the railroad could make everyone rich if they handled it properly. I want to know what that means. Gabriel exchanged a meaningful glance with Abby. It means you've provided us with extremely valuable information, Tommy. Information that might help us avoid a dangerous situation. The boy beamed with pride. I can find out more. The judge never notices me when I'm helping with deliveries. Adults never really see children unless we're making trouble. It would be safer if you kept your distance, Abby cautioned, concern evident in her voice. But if I happen to hear something important, Tommy persisted, I could leave a message with Mrs. Fleming. She always gives me cookies when I deliver firewood. The arrangement was reluctantly agreed upon, with strict conditions about Tommy's safety. As the boy slipped away as quietly as he'd arrived, Gabriel studied Clayton's map with newfound concern. We'll need to adjust our approach, he said grimly. Clayton's clearly anticipated interest in the mine. At least now we know what we're facing, Abby replied. Thanks to our young ally. With Tommy's intelligence, they modified their plans, choosing to approach the northern ridge from a less obvious path than the main trail, hopefully avoiding Clayton's watchful men. Perhaps it was time, she thought, to reveal that final piece of William's legacy. For history repeated itself in the most tragic way possible. Dawn broke over Promise Valley with ominous grandeur, painting the mountains in shades of fiery amber, while dark clouds gathered on the western horizon. Gabriel stood on the porch of the main house, assessing the changing weather with a practiced eye. The temperature had risen overnight, a deceptive warmth that experienced mountain dwellers recognized as the harbinger of an approaching storm. "We should postpone," Mrs. Fleming advised as she brought him coffee. The housekeeper's weathered face creased with concern. "Barometer's falling fast. We'll have snow by afternoon." Gabriel accepted the steaming cup with a grateful nod. "Unfortunately, timing may be more critical than comfort. Judge Clayton is already watching our movements." "All the more reason not to get stranded on the northern ridge," Mrs. Fleming countered pragmatically. "Dead men uncover no secrets, sir." The door to Abby's cottage opened before Gabriel could respond. She emerged dressed in practical attire, woolen trousers beneath a heavy skirt, sturdy boots, and multiple layers topped by a man's coat that appeared several sizes too large for her slender frame. "Martha's husband's," she explained, noticing Gabriel's raised eyebrow. "Better protection than anything I own." Despite the serious nature of their expedition, Gabriel couldn't help smiling at the sight. Practical and resourceful, Abby continually defied conventional expectations. "Mrs. Fleming was just expressing concerns about the weather," he said as Abby joined them. "She's right to worry," Abby agreed, glancing at the distant clouds. "But we can reach Tunnel 7 and return before the worst hits if we leave immediately. I've packed provisions in case we're delayed." Her calm competence reinforced Gabriel's confidence in their plan. Though raised in the comforts of Boston society, he recognized resilience born of necessity when he saw it. Abby Lawson had survived circumstances that would have broken many. A mountain snowstorm was unlikely to deter her. "Then we should depart," he decided, draining his coffee. "Mrs. Fleming, if we're not back by nightfall—" "I'll alert Sheriff Wilson," the housekeeper finished. "Though what good that man would do is questionable. More loyal to his whiskey than his badge most days." With final preparations completed, they set out on horseback. Gabriel on his chestnut mare, Abby on a sturdy gray gelding borrowed from the livery. They followed the main road north until the town disappeared behind them, then veered east toward the rugged ridgeline that dominated the valley's edge. "William's claim begins where those pines thin out," Gabriel explained, consulting Martha's map. "Tunnel 7 should be accessible through a ravine about halfway up." Abby studied the terrain ahead, mentally comparing it to the map's markings. The entrance may be partially collapsed after all these years. The Silver Company abandoned these outer tunnels in '68 when the main vein played out. Yet William found something worth claiming, Gabriel reminded her, something valuable enough to die for. They rode in companionable silence for the next hour, the horses laboring as the trail steepened. The temperature continued its peculiar rise, creating an unseasonable dampness that clung to their clothing and made the snow underfoot increasingly treacherous. "There," Abby finally said, pointing to a narrow opening in the rock face ahead. "That should be the ravine leading to Tunnel 7. They dismounted, securing the horses to a sturdy pine. Gabriel removed equipment from his saddlebags, lanterns, picks, and the small revolver he transferred to his coat pocket. The weight of the weapon was unfamiliar but necessary. If William had indeed been murdered over his discovery, they might face similar danger. The ravine proved challenging, its floor covered with loose shale hidden beneath treacherous snow. They advanced carefully, using exposed tree roots as handholds where the path grew particularly steep. "Martha's map suggests the tunnel entrance should be just beyond that outcropping," Gabriel said, pausing to catch his breath. The thinning air at this elevation made physical exertion more taxing than he'd anticipated. Abby moved ahead, her smaller frame navigating the narrow passage with greater ease. She disappeared around the rocky protrusion, then called back. "I've found it, but there's something strange." Gabriel hurried forward to join her. The tunnel entrance was partially obscured by fallen rocks, but remained accessible. What caught his attention, however, was what Abby had already noticed: recent footprints in the snow leading into the darkness. "Someone's been here," Abby whispered, "within the last day or two." Gabriel's hand moved instinctively to the revolver in his pocket. "Clayton's men?" "Possibly." Abby knelt to examine the prints more closely. One person, heavy-set based on the depth, wearing work boots. "We should proceed with caution," Gabriel decided after a moment's consideration. "But I don't intend to turn back now." Abby nodded, her expression determined. "Nor do I." They lit their lanterns and entered the tunnel, the temperature dropping immediately as they moved beyond the reach of the weak winter sunlight. The passage was roughly hewn, its walls bearing the marks of picks and blasting from a bygone era. Support timbers, weathered but still sound, lined sections where the rock appeared less stable. The main shaft should be about 50 yards in, Abby said, her voice echoing slightly. According to Martha's map, it descends another 30 feet to where the silver vein was worked. They advanced slowly, alert to both physical hazards and signs of recent activity. The tunnel floor showed clear evidence of disturbance, scuff marks in the dust, the occasional footprint where moisture had collected. Someone was definitely searching for something, Gabriel observed. What they didn't know was that Tommy Wheeler had taken it upon himself to visit Martha Coleman that morning, ostensibly to borrow a book about steam engines, but actually to deliver a coded message from Abby. Miss Martha, the boy had said carefully, reciting the practice words, the leather volume about mountain passages would be most helpful for my studies. Martha, quick to understand, had retrieved Robert's Journal of Mining Surveys, slipping it into a sack of kindling wood for Tommy to deliver to Gabriel's house. You're a brave young man, she told him, pressing a coin into his palm. But be cautious, Tommy. Judge Clayton has eyes everywhere. He doesn't see me, Tommy had replied, with the confidence of the chronically overlooked. Nobody really looks at delivery boys. This innocent-seeming exchange had ensured that vital information reached Gabriel and Abby without Martha having to visit them directly, a movement that would certainly have been noted by Clayton's watchful allies throughout town. The information from Martha's additional journals had allowed them to identify a lesser-known side entrance to the tunnel system, helping them avoid the main access point where Clayton's men might be watching. The main shaft should be about 50 yards in, Abby said, her voice echoing slightly. According to Martha's map, it descends another 30 feet to where the silver vein was worked. The main shaft appeared just as Abby had predicted, a vertical opening with crude wooden ladder rungs anchored to one side. The recent visitor had clearly descended, as evidenced by fresh scrapes on the ancient wood. I'll go first, Gabriel decided. Test the rungs. Be careful, Abby cautioned. Those supports are over 20 years old. Gabriel handed her his lantern and began the descent, testing each rung before committing his weight. The ladder creaked ominously but held. When he reached the bottom, he called up, "It's secure enough. Come down slowly." Abby followed with surprising agility, passing down the lanterns before making her own descent. At the bottom, they found themselves in a larger chamber where the original silver vein had been extracted. Multiple smaller tunnels branched outward like spokes from a wheel, disappearing into darkness. Which way would William have gone, Abby wondered, raising her lantern to better illuminate their surroundings. Gabriel consulted Martha's map again. The richest deposits were found in the northeastern branch, but those were exhausted decades ago. So logically, he would have explored one of the undeveloped sections, Abby reasoned, perhaps where mining was abandoned before completion. She moved toward the westernmost tunnel, where the excavation appeared less finished than the others. The recent visitors' tracks led in the same direction, confirming their suspicion. The passage narrowed as they advanced, its ceiling lowering until Gabriel was forced to stoop. Abby, with her smaller stature, moved more easily, but remained close to his side, their lanterns creating overlapping pools of light in the oppressive darkness. "Look at the walls here," she said suddenly, raising her lantern higher. "These aren't silver ore markings. This is coal," Gabriel finished, running his fingers along the black seam visible in the rock face. "A coal deposit within a silver mine." "That's unusual but not unprecedented," Abby noted, "though not particularly valuable compared to silver." "Perhaps not in the 1860s, Gabriel agreed, "but with the railroad's expansion." Understanding dawned on Abby's face. Coal for the steam engines. A reliable fuel source would be incredibly valuable along a new rail line. Exactly. And if William discovered a significant coal deposit directly along the proposed route, it would be worth a fortune to whoever controlled it, Abby concluded, especially someone who already owned the surrounding property. They continued deeper, following both the coal seam and the fresh footprints. The tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing damper and heavier. "The vein is getting thicker," Gabriel observed, examining the walls, "and higher quality from what I can tell." "This would be enough to supply locomotives for years," Abby agreed, "but why would this lead to murder? Coal deposits aren't exactly rare in Colorado." Location, Gabriel explained. This deposit sits directly on what would be the most efficient rail path through the mountains. The railroad would have no choice but to deal with whoever owned the mineral rights. And they had reached a point where the tunnel abruptly ended, not in a natural conclusion, but in a deliberate barricade of rocks and timber. Someone sealed this section, Abby said, examining the blockage. Recently, Gabriel directed his lantern at the floor, where disturbed dust and scattered rocks indicated recent activity. Our mysterious visitor was here for a purpose. Help me clear some of these rocks. They worked methodically, removing smaller stones to create an opening large enough to see beyond. When Gabriel raised his lantern to illuminate the space, both gasped at what the light revealed. Behind the barricade lay a small chamber, and within it, the partially preserved remains of a man. Despite the advanced decomposition, the clothing was still recognizable. Work attire similar to what miners and railroad workers typically wore. A rusted pick lay beside the body, along with a leather satchel. "My God," Abby whispered, instinctively stepping back. "Who is he?" Gabriel steeled himself and moved closer, examining the scene without disturbing it. "No way to identify him without—" He trailed off, unwilling to articulate the gruesome process that would be required. "Look at the skull," Abby said quietly, pointing with a steady hand that belied her evident distress. "That's not decay, that's impact damage." Gabriel directed his lantern where she indicated. A large, depressed fracture marred the back of the skull, evidence of violent trauma rather than natural deterioration. "He was murdered," Gabriel concluded grimly. "Struck from behind and sealed in this chamber." "But why? And who?" Abby looked around the small space, searching for clues. This happened long before William's death. Years based on the condition. Gabriel carefully reached for the leather satchel, finding it stiff but intact. Inside were several folded papers, protected from the worst of the elements by the treated leather. He extracted them gently, unfolding what appeared to be survey documents. "These are geological surveys," he said, studying the faded text, dated 1876. "And look at the signature. Robert Coleman." "Martha's husband," Abby breathed, "but he died working on the Transcontinental Railroad. At least, that's what Martha was told." "Maybe that was a convenient story," Gabriel suggested. "Look at these notes. Coleman had documented this entire coal deposit 7 years ago. He mapped it extensively, noting its potential value for the future railroad." Abby leaned closer, reading the margin notes. "And here, he mentioned sharing his findings with Judge Clayton, who was financing his survey." Her expression hardened. "Clayton knew about this deposit all along. He's been acquiring the surrounding properties for years, positioning himself to control it once the railroad arrived. William must have found these surveys," Gabriel reasoned, the pieces falling into place. "Or perhaps rediscovered the coal deposit independently. Either way, he filed his claim directly over the most valuable section. Cutting Clayton out of the very prize he'd been working toward for years," Abby concluded. "No wonder he reacted so violently." The implications hung heavily in the tunnel's stale air. Not one murder, but two, Robert Coleman and William Harrington, both eliminated to protect Clayton's secret ambition. "We need to take these documents," Gabriel decided. "Get them to the federal marshal in Denver. This is evidence of multiple crimes." As they carefully returned the papers to the satchel, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnel. Not the sound of falling rocks, but something more ominous. "The storm," Abby realized. "It's arrived earlier than expected." "We should leave immediately," Gabriel agreed, securing the satchel inside his coat. "The path down the ridge will become treacherous quickly." They made their way back through the tunnel with increased urgency, the knowledge of what they carried adding weight to every step. The latter proved more challenging on the ascent, the ancient woods slick with condensation from their breath in the cold air. When they finally emerged from the tunnel entrance, they found conditions had deteriorated dramatically. Heavy snow was already falling, driven by gusting winds that reduced visibility to mere yards. The temperature had plummeted as suddenly as it had risen, transforming the previous dampness into treacherous ice. "We won't make it back to town in this," Abby assessed grimly. "Not safely." Gabriel surveyed their surroundings, mentally calculating options. Martha mentioned an old line cabin about a mile north of here, used by the mining company for shelter during operations. "Better than attempting the descent," Abby agreed. The horses should be able to manage that distance even in these conditions. They located their mounts, finding the animals restless but present. The journey to the line cabin proved arduous, the trail rapidly disappearing beneath fresh snow, while the wind grew increasingly fierce. By the time the small structure appeared through the whiteness, both riders and horses were exhausted. The cabin was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace, its roof sagging but intact. Inside, dust and abandonment greeted them, but the essential elements for survival remained. A stack of aged firewood, basic cooking implements, and crude bunks built into the wall. Not the cattleman's hotel, Gabriel commented wryly as they secured the horses in the attached lean-to, but considerably better than freezing on the mountainside. Abby immediately set to work building a fire while Gabriel brought in their provisions and additional wood. The flames caught quickly, casting welcome warmth and light through the cabin's dim interior. Outside, the storm's fury intensified, snow and ice battering the roof with growing ferocity. "We could be here for days if this continues," Abby observed, warming her hands by the fire. "Though I suspect Judge Clayton's men will come searching once the weather clears." "By then, we need to be far from Promise Valley," Gabriel replied. "These documents must reach proper authorities." As warmth gradually permeated the cabin, they shared the provisions Abby had packed: dried meat, hard biscuits, and coffee brewed over the open fire. The simple meal tasted better than any Gabriel could remember, perhaps enhanced by the satisfaction of their discovery. "What will happen after?" Abby asked quietly as they sat before the fire, the storm howling outside. "When Clayton is exposed and justice is served for William and Robert Coleman?" Gabriel considered the question, realizing he hadn't thought much beyond his quest for truth. "I'll need to return to Boston eventually. My business requires attention." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "What about you? Will you stay in Promise Valley?" Abby stared into the flames. "There's nothing for me here. Perhaps San Francisco, as I'd always planned. They need teachers there, I'm told." "You'd make an excellent teacher," Gabriel said sincerely, "though your talents could take you in many directions." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's persistent assault on their shelter. In this isolated moment, suspended between danger past and danger yet to come, Gabriel found himself acutely aware of Abby's presence, her quiet strength, her remarkable intelligence, the gentle curve of her profile illuminated by firelight. "I never thanked you properly," he said suddenly. Abby looked up, questioning. "For what?" "Those 6 coins," Gabriel replied softly. "Your last 6 coins, given to a stranger who didn't need them." "I've been fortunate in my life, Abby. I've rarely known true want, but I recognize sacrifice when I see it." Color touched her cheeks. "It wasn't sacrifice, just humanity." "Humanity is rarer than you might think." Gabriel hesitated, then continued. "In Boston, charity is often a social obligation rather than a spontaneous act of kindness. What you did, it reminded me of something my mother used to say, that the true measure of a person isn't found in what they take, but in what they give when they have little themselves." "Your mother sounds wise," Abby said softly. "She was." Gabriel smiled at the memory. "She would have liked you tremendously." Another silence fell, this one charged with unspoken possibilities. Gabriel found himself at a crossroads, one path leading back to his carefully ordered life in Boston, the other towards something undefined but compelling. Before he could pursue the thought further, however, a sound outside the cabin froze them both. Horses approaching, the jingle of tack barely audible above the storm. "Someone's coming," Abby whispered, rising quickly. "Multiple riders." Gabriel moved to the cabin's single window, wiping frost from the glass to peer outside. Through the swirling snow, he could make out the shadowy forms of 3 mounted men approaching the cabin. "Clayton's men," he concluded grimly, reaching for his revolver. "They must have followed our trail before the snow covered it." "We're trapped," Abby stated, the calmness of her voice belying the fear Gabriel glimpsed in her eyes. "There's no back exit." Gabriel assessed their options swiftly. "Take the documents," he decided, removing the satchel from his coat. "Hide them beneath the floorboards. No matter what happens, these must reach the authorities." Abby accepted the leather bundle, quickly locating a loose board near the fireplace and concealing the evidence of Clayton's crimes. Just as she replaced the board, heavy footsteps sounded on the cabin's small porch. A pounding fist rattled the door. "Open up in there, sheriff's business." Gabriel and Abby exchanged glances, silently communicating. The voice belonged to Sheriff Wilson, technically law enforcement, but known to be firmly under Clayton's influence. Gabriel positioned himself between Abby and the door, his revolver hidden but accessible. "Sheriff Wilson," he called, "what brings you out in such weather?" "Open this door, Harrington, now!" Gabriel unlatched the door, stepping back as it swung inward. Sheriff Wilson entered first, snow crusting his beard and coat. Behind him came two men Gabriel recognized as regular patrons of the Frontier Saloon, local toughs who often handled Clayton's less reputable business. "Mr. Harrington," Wilson said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol, "Judge Clayton was concerned when you and Miss Lawson didn't return before the storm. Sent us to ensure your safety." "How considerate," Gabriel replied evenly. "As you can see, we found adequate shelter." Wilson's gaze traveled past Gabriel to Abby, then surveyed the cabin with exaggerated thoroughness. "Quite cozy. Might I ask what business brought you to the northern ridge during threatening weather?" "Railroad survey work," Gabriel answered smoothly, "assessing potential routes through the pass." "Curious choice of assistant for such technical work," Wilson commented, nodding toward Abby. "Unless there were other considerations." Gabriel felt anger rise at the insinuation but maintained his composed demeanor. "Miss Lawson's knowledge of local geography has proven invaluable." Wilson removed his hat, shaking snow onto the floor. "Judge Clayton would like to speak with you both, immediately." "Impossible in this weather," Gabriel pointed out, "unless the judge has suddenly relocated to this mountainside." "The storm's easing," Wilson countered. "We can make it to town by nightfall if we leave now." Gabriel hesitated, weighing their options. Refusing would only escalate suspicions, yet accompanying Wilson clearly placed them in greater danger. Before he could respond, however, Abby stepped forward. "Of course we'll return with you, Sheriff," she said calmly. "Mr. Harrington has been eager to discuss his findings with Judge Clayton." Her steady gaze conveyed a clear message to Gabriel. "Play along." He nodded slightly, understanding. "Indeed, though I would have preferred more favorable conditions for the journey." Wilson appeared momentarily thrown by their easy compliance. "Good. Gather your things, then. We leave in 5 minutes." As the sheriff stepped outside to confer with his companions, Gabriel turned to Abby. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. "Martha," Abby replied softly, "we need to get word to her. She's our only chance of retrieving the documents if—" She didn't complete the thought. Gabriel understood the implications. If Clayton's suspicions were confirmed, they might not have another opportunity to return for the evidence. "We'll find a way," he promised, gathering their minimal belongings while ensuring the floorboard concealing the satchel remained undisturbed. The journey down the mountain proved as treacherous as anticipated. The storm had indeed lessened in intensity, but the accumulated snow and ice made each step hazardous. Wilson and his men set a demanding pace, clearly intent on reaching town before full darkness. Gabriel remained close to Abby, ready to assist if her horse faltered on the slippery path. They exchanged few words, aware of Wilson's watchful attention, but Gabriel drew strength from her composed presence. Whatever awaited them in Promise Valley, they would face it together. The town emerged from the whiteness like a ship through fog, lamplight glowing in windows and smoke rising from chimneys. Instead of heading toward the main street, however, Wilson directed them toward a large house on the town's western edge, Judge Clayton's residence. "The judge is expecting you," Wilson explained as they dismounted. "Best not keep him waiting." The house reflected Clayton's position, imposing, meticulously maintained, with an air of established wealth that contrasted sharply with the frontier functionality of most Promise Valley buildings. Inside, warmth and luxury greeted them. A servant took their snow-crusted coats while Wilson escorted them to Clayton's study. The judge rose from behind a massive oak desk as they entered, his silver hair immaculately groomed despite the late hour. "Mr. Harrington, Miss Lawson," he acknowledged, his smile not reaching his eyes. "How fortunate that Sheriff Wilson located you. This storm has proven quite severe." "Your concern is touching, Judge Clayton," Gabriel replied with equal insincerity, "though I confess surprise at the urgency of this meeting." Clayton gestured to leather chairs positioned before his desk. Please sit. Brandy, you both look chilled to the bone. No, thank you, Abby declined politely. Gabriel similarly refused. Clayton poured himself a generous portion before returning to his chair. I'll come directly to the point. Your activities have attracted attention, Mr. Harrington. Unusual activities for someone purportedly conducting a standard railroad survey. The Union Pacific values thoroughness, Gabriel countered. Proper assessment requires exploration beyond obvious routes. Indeed, Clayton swirled his brandy contemplatively. Yet your interest seems particularly focused on matters unrelated to railroads. Old mining claims, for instance. Property records from years past. He set his glass down, leaning forward. Let us dispense with pretense, Mr. Harrington. You're not here for the railroad. You're investigating your brother's death. The direct acknowledgement momentarily startled Gabriel, though he maintained his composure. William deserved better than a hasty ruling of suicide. Grief often blinds us to obvious truths, Clayton said with manufactured sympathy. Your brother faced mounting pressure. The passage survey presented significant challenges. Many men break under such circumstances. William wasn't many men, Gabriel replied evenly, nor was he suicidal. You were in Boston, Clayton reminded him. You couldn't know his state of mind. I knew my brother, Gabriel insisted, as did others who found his alleged suicide suspicious. Clayton's expression hardened slightly. Such as Miss Lawson? I wasn't aware she had any connection to William Harrington. I didn't, Abby confirmed calmly, but I've assisted Mr. Harrington in reviewing documents related to his brother's final days. Out of the goodness of your heart, no doubt, Clayton remarked, his tone conveying clear skepticism. His attention returned to Gabriel. What exactly do you hope to achieve with this investigation? Justice, Gabriel stated simply, for William and others who may have suffered similar fates. A dangerous stillness settled over Clayton's features. Others? What others might those be? Robert Coleman, for one, Gabriel replied, watching Clayton carefully. Martha's husband, officially reported as dying in a railroad accident, yet curiously connected to valuable geological surveys that benefited you enormously. The judge's knuckles whitened around his brandy glass. You're treading on very thin ice, Mr. Harrington. Am I? Or perhaps I'm simply uncovering what's beneath the ice. Truths long buried but not forgotten. Clayton set his glass down with deliberate control. Sheriff Wilson believes you visited Tunnel 7 today. A dangerous location, especially in winter. What possible interest could an abandoned silver mine hold for a railroad survey? The question confirmed Gabriel's suspicions. They had indeed been followed, and Clayton was fully aware of the tunnel's significance. Historical context, Gabriel improvised. Previous industrial development often indicates suitable terrain for rail lines. A convenient explanation, Clayton observed. Yet I wonder what you really found in that tunnel, or perhaps who you found. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Gabriel met Clayton's gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. Historical artifacts only, Judge, though sometimes the past has much to teach us about the present. Clayton studied them both for a long moment before his expression shifted to one of calculated pleasantness. Well, whatever your true purpose in Promise Valley, Mr. Harrington, I must insist that you conclude your business promptly. The weather has made travel hazardous, and I would hate for anything unfortunate to befall you or Miss Lawson. Is that a threat, Judge Clayton? Gabriel asked quietly. Merely practical advice, Clayton replied, rising to indicate the meeting's conclusion. Promise Valley can be unforgiving to those who don't understand its nature. Sheriff Wilson will escort you both home. I suggest you remain there until the road's clear. For your own safety, of course. As they were led from the house, Gabriel and Abby exchanged glances, mutual understanding passing between them. Clayton's message had been clear. Their investigation had reached dangerous ground, and their time was running out. Outside, the storm had subsided to gentle snowfall, the temperature dropping further as night deepened. Sheriff Wilson accompanied them silently to Gabriel's house, his presence more jailer than protector. I'll have men keeping an eye on the property, Wilson informed them as they dismounted. Judge Clayton's orders, for your protection during the storm. How thoughtful, Gabriel remarked dryly. Please convey our appreciation to the judge. When Wilson had departed, they entered the house to find Mrs. Fleming waiting anxiously in the kitchen, relief washing over her weathered features at their safe return. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed. "I was about to send for help when Sheriff Wilson arrived saying he was going to find you." "We're fine, Mrs. Fleming," Abby assured her, though quite exhausted. "I've kept soup warm," the housekeeper said practically, "and built up the fires in both your rooms." After they had eaten and Mrs. Fleming had retired for the night, Gabriel and Abby met in the office, speaking in hushed tones despite their isolation. "Clayton knows," Gabriel stated grimly, "about the body, the documents, all of it. But he doesn't know we've hidden the evidence," Abby pointed out. "Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so restrained." "We need to retrieve those documents before his men do," Gabriel said. "And we need to get word to Martha. If something happens to us—" "Don't," Abby interrupted, her hand covering his on the desk. "We'll find a way through this." Gabriel turned his palm upward, capturing her fingers in a gentle grasp. "I've dragged you into considerable danger, Abby. I'm sorry for that." "I chose this path," she reminded him. "No one forced me." Their eyes held for a long moment, unspoken emotions passing between them. Finally, Gabriel spoke the question that had been forming in his mind since their conversation in the line cabin. What if there was another option? Beyond Promise Valley, beyond San Francisco? Abby's expression stilled. "What are you suggesting?" "Boston," Gabriel said simply. "My company needs someone with your abilities, your intelligence, your insight, your tenacity." Surprise registered on her features. "You're offering me employment? In Boston?" "I'm offering you a future," Gabriel corrected softly. "One where your talents are valued rather than feared, where you might find the respect and opportunity Promise Valley has denied you." Abby withdrew her hand slowly, her gaze dropping to the desktop. "That's generous?" "It's not generosity," Gabriel insisted. "It's recognition of your worth." Before Abby could respond, a soft tapping at the window startled them both. Gabriel moved cautiously to investigate, hand reaching for his revolver. Peering through the frost-edged glass, he was astonished to see Tommy Wheeler's small face looking back into him. Gabriel opened the window, cold air rushing into the room. "Tommy, what on earth are you doing here?" The boy climbed awkwardly through the opening, snow-dusting his coat and cap. "I had to warn you," he said breathlessly. "They're coming for you. Both of you." "Who is?" Abby asked, hurrying to the boy's side. "Judge Clayton's men," Tommy explained, shivering. "I was at the sheriff's office. Ma sent me to ask about getting our fence fixed after the storm. I heard them talking. They're going to arrest you tonight for trespassing on the northern ridge. Take you both to jail." "On what grounds?" Gabriel demanded. "Made up ones," Tommy replied with a child's directness. "Sheriff said it doesn't matter what the charge is. Just needs to hold you until—" "Until what, Tommy?" Abby prompted gently. The boy's expression grew troubled. "Until they can make it look like an accident. Sheriff said jailhouse fires happen, especially in winter when stoves get overloaded." Gabriel and Abby exchanged alarmed glances. Clayton had moved beyond threats to action, a decisive and deadly response to their discoveries. "Thank you for warning us, Tommy," Gabriel said, squeezing the boy's shoulder. "You've shown remarkable courage." "Miss Abby saved my life," Tommy replied simply. "Had to return the favor." "You need to go home immediately," Abby urged, "before anyone notices you're missing. And Tommy, you must not tell anyone you were here. It could be dangerous for you and your mother." The boy nodded solemnly. "I know. Ma always says I talk too much, but I can keep secrets when they matter." He hesitated, then added, "Are you going to leave Promise Valley?" "Yes," Gabriel confirmed. "As soon as possible." "Good." Tommy's expression was unusually serious for his years. "This town isn't good enough for Miss Abby anyway. Never was." After ensuring Tommy departed safely through the kitchen door, Gabriel turned to Abby, decision crystallizing. "We need to leave immediately, before Wilson arrives." "We can't abandon the evidence," Abby insisted, "not after what it cost William and Robert Coleman." "We won't," Gabriel assured her, "but we need help, someone who can retrieve the documents while we create a diversion." Abby considered this. "Martha," she said after a moment, "she knows the ridge, and she has more reason than anyone to want the truth revealed. Can we get word to her without arousing suspicion?" "Mrs. Fleming," Abby suggested. "She visits Martha regularly. They're old friends." Gabriel nodded, plan forming rapidly. "We'll leave tonight. Make it appear we've fled in panic, heading south toward Denver. Clayton's men will follow. Meanwhile, Martha can retrieve the documents and take them to the federal marshal through a different route. And us? Abby asked. We'll circle back, Gabriel explained. Meet Martha at a predetermined location once she has the evidence. Abby nodded, accepting the logic of his strategy. Where shall we tell her to meet us? Gabriel considered, then smiled slightly. The old line cabin, the last place Clayton would expect us to return to. They roused Mrs. Fleming, explaining the situation in hushed tones. The housekeeper's expression grew increasingly grim as she absorbed the danger they faced. Judge Clayton's been running roughshod over this town for too long, she declared finally. I'd be honored to help bring him to justice. With remarkable efficiency, Mrs. Fleming prepared provisions while Gabriel and Abby gathered essential items for their journey. Within an hour they were ready, horses saddled, message composed for Martha, escape route planned. Godspeed, Mrs. Fleming whispered as they prepared to depart through the property's rear access, away from the watchful eyes of Wilson's men posted at the front. And be careful, that man has eyes everywhere. The night enfolded them in its dark embrace as they rode eastward, away from town. The storm had passed, leaving a crystalline sky filled with stars that cast faint blue light across the snow-covered landscape. Their breath and that of their horses clouded in the frigid air, the only sound the muffled thud of hooves and the occasional creak of saddle leather. Gabriel glanced at Abby riding beside him, her profile determined and composed despite the danger they faced. In that moment, he recognized what had been growing within him since their first encounter, admiration deepening into something stronger, more profound. When this is over, he began. Let's ensure it's over first, Abby interrupted gently. Then we can discuss what comes after. Gabriel nodded, accepting her practical wisdom. Yet as they continued through the starlit night, he found himself already planning for that after, a future that somehow had become unimaginable without Abby Lawson in it. Behind them, Promise Valley slept uneasily, unaware that its carefully maintained facade of respectability was about to crumble beneath the weight of long-buried truths. Before them lay uncertainty and danger, but also the possibility of justice. For William, for Robert Coleman, and perhaps even for Abby herself. The road ahead wound through moonlit forests and snow-filled meadows, a silver ribbon leading toward whatever destiny awaited them. Together they followed it into the darkness, guided by stars in the unwavering belief that truth, however painful, was the only path toward healing, for themselves and for the town that had harbored secrets for far too long. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the northern ridge, Martha Coleman stood beside Gabriel and Abby at the entrance to Tunnel 7. Federal Marshal James Bennett and his deputies had arrived the previous evening, summoned by the evidence Martha had successfully retrieved from the line cabin. You've taken considerable risks, Bennett remarked, his weathered face grave as he studied the documents from Robert Coleman's satchel. Judge Clayton is not a man to cross lightly. Some risks are necessary, Gabriel replied, watching as deputies carefully removed Robert Coleman's remains from the sealed chamber. My brother deserved justice, so did Robert Coleman. Martha touched the locket at her throat, tears glistening in her faded eyes as she witnessed her husband's recovery after so many years of uncertainty. Robert always said truth was like a river. It might be diverted for a time, but eventually finds its proper channel. Judge Clayton had been arrested at his home before dawn, the evidence against him irrefutable. Mayor Ross and Sheriff Wilson were similarly in custody, their complicity in the cover-up established through documents and witness testimony. What happens now? Abby asked, standing slightly apart from the others, her expression contemplative as she gazed across the valley spread below. Justice takes its course, Marshal Bennett replied. Trials, testimony, sentences. The legal system may move slowly, but it reaches its destination eventually. In Promise Valley? Martha inquired softly. What becomes of the town? Towns endure, Bennett said philosophically. They reinvent themselves after scandal, much as people do. New leadership will emerge, perhaps better than before. As they spoke, a small figure approached hesitantly from the path leading to town. Gertrude Wheeler stood awkwardly at the edge of the clearing, Tommy at her side urging her forward. When she finally reached them, her usual stern demeanor had softened, replaced by something less certain. Miss Lawson, she began, her voice lacking its customary sharpness. I've just learned about Judge Clayton's dealings. It seems he threatened my late husband when Thomas discovered irregularities in the land transactions. She paused, clearly struggling with the words. I owe you an apology for many things. Abby regarded her with surprise. Mrs. Wheeler, that isn't necessary. It is, the woman interrupted, her hand tightening on Tommy's shoulder. I've been unkind, unfair. When you saved Tommy's life, I should have. She faltered, then straightened her shoulders. My boy wants to learn about engineering. He says you've encouraged his interest when others dismissed it. Would you, would you be willing to recommend suitable books before you leave town? The request, so simple yet so profound in what it acknowledged, hung in the air between them. Abby glanced at Tommy, whose hopeful expression revealed how much his mother's gesture meant to him. I'd be happy to, Abby replied gently. Martha has an excellent collection. Perhaps Tommy could visit her before she leaves for Denver. Mrs. Wheeler nodded, a hint of her old crispness returning. Well, that would be suitable, I think. She hesitated, then added more softly, Thank you, Miss Lawson, for everything. As the Wheelers departed, Gabriel watched Abby's face, noting the quiet satisfaction that crossed her features. Another small victory, he observed. Perhaps the most meaningful one, Abby replied thoughtfully. Change comes in many forms. The marshal excused himself to supervise his deputies, leaving Gabriel, Abby, and Martha alone at the tunnel entrance. The morning sun had fully risen now, bathing the snow-covered landscape in golden light that belied the darkness they had uncovered beneath. As they departed the ridge that afternoon, Promise Valley was already transformed. News of Clayton's arrest and the shocking revelations behind it spread through the town like wildfire. Outside the general store, a crowd gathered, their voices a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and the peculiar excitement that accompanies collective revelation. I always knew there was something not right about the judge, Mr. Simmons declared, conveniently forgetting his years of deference to Clayton. Too prosperous for honest work, I always said. Mrs. Pritchard stood silent at the edge of the group, her usual imperious demeanor noticeably diminished. Her gaze followed Abby as the party rode down Main Street, something unspoken but unmistakable shifting in her eyes. She wasn't alone. Throughout town, people who had once crossed the street to avoid Abby now nodded in awkward acknowledgement, their previous certainties shaken to the core. Most telling was young Tommy Wheeler, who broke free from his mother's grasp to run alongside Abby's horse. You were right all along, Miss Abby, he called up to her, beaming with admiration. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Wheeler made no move to stop him. Instead, she stepped forward with uncharacteristic humility. Miss Lawson, she said, the formal address itself a concession, it seems we have misjudged many things. She hesitated, decades of rigid social certainties visibly crumbling. My son owes you his life twice over now. We all do, in a way. Abby merely nodded, accepting but not needing the validation that had come too late to change her path forward. The town's awakening conscience was important for Promise Valley's future, but her own future now lay elsewhere. I've been offered a teaching position in Denver, Martha revealed, breaking the contemplative silence. The school board wrote weeks ago, but I couldn't imagine leaving. Now, she gestured toward the valley. Perhaps it's time for a new chapter. You'd be an exceptional teacher, Abby said warmly. Those students would be fortunate indeed. And you? Martha asked, her perceptive gaze moving between Abby and Gabriel. What path will you choose now? Gabriel looked to Abby, allowing her the space to answer for herself. Their journey through danger had deepened their connection, yet he remained acutely aware that her independence, her right to determine her own future, was precious after years of having choices made for her by circumstance. I've been considering Boston, Abby said after a moment, her eyes meeting Gabriel's with quiet certainty. I understand there are opportunities there for women with unconventional skills. Joy surged through Gabriel, though he maintained his composure. Substantial opportunities, he confirmed, though the winters are nearly as harsh as Colorado's. I've endured worse than cold, Abby replied with the ghost of a smile. Martha observed their exchange with knowing eyes. Well then, it seems Promise Valley's loss will be Boston's gain. She reached for Abby's hands, clasping them firmly. Remember what I've always told you. Knowledge is never wasted, Abby finished, returning the older woman's grip. I'll carry that lesson always, Martha. As they descended the ridge toward town, Gabriel found himself filled with an unfamiliar sense of completion. He had come to Promise Valley seeking justice for William. He would leave with that mission fulfilled, but also with something he hadn't expected to find. A woman whose courage and intelligence had transformed his understanding of what truly mattered in life. The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities that neither could have imagined when a saloon girl had counted 6 copper coins on a windowsill, deciding to spend them on breakfast for a stranger. That simple act of kindness had set in motion events that exposed corruption, delivered justice, and perhaps most remarkably, created the possibility of love between two people whom circumstance should never have brought together. Promise Valley receded behind them, its snow-covered buildings growing smaller with distance. Ahead lay new horizons. For Martha in Denver, for Tommy Wheeler with his dreams of engineering, now encouraged rather than dismissed, and for Gabriel and Abby together, forging a path based not on rescue or gratitude, but on mutual respect and deepening affection. As they reached the valley floor, Gabriel guided his horse alongside Abby's. "You're certain about Boston?" and he asked quietly. "It's a significant change." Abby's eyes met his, clear and resolute. "I've spent years surviving, Gabriel. Perhaps it's time I learned about living instead." He nodded, understanding the profound shift her decision represented. "We'll build something worthwhile," he promised. "Something honest and good." "On equal ground," Abby stipulated, her expression serious despite the warmth in her eyes. "On equal ground," Gabriel agreed. "Partners in every sense." The sun climbed higher as they continued their journey, casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. Behind them, Promise Valley stood at the threshold of transformation, its future uncertain but perhaps brighter for the truth that had finally emerged. Before them lay a different kind of promise, not of a valley, but of a life built on choice rather than circumstance, on truth rather than convenient lies, and on the profound understanding that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not found in silver mines or coal seams, but in the quiet courage of a human heart.